today.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, well, in our ongoing attempts to keep you abreast of all views, or as many as we can across the Parliament, it's been a while since we've had Western Sydney Independent MP Di Lee with us, and that means she's overdue and she's here today. Welcome back, Di. Why don't we start with The Voice, since this is the last sitting before everyone returns home and runs up towards referendum day. We've kept tabs on this with you over time. What's your latest outlook on how that sits in the electorate of Fowler?
Look, I think things still have not shifted or changed much in my electorate in regards to The Voice. I still, when I go back from Canberra to my electorate, the majority of people that come to see me or see me in the streets talking about things such as interest rates, housing in particular, rent rises, grocery price rises, as well as matters such as immigration and NDIS. So it hasn't. I think we've got about 5 emails in sending to us. Some of them are not from our electorate either, and various opinion about yes and no cases, saying for no. Like I think I had one today and one yesterday saying no.
Right.
You know, is a divisive issue, but. The majority of hundreds of cases that we get are mainly about helping the constituents there, and people like, for instance, approaching us about food for students in schools.
And so do you expect, I know it's only anecdotal evidence, but do you expect the majority view in Fowler to be no?
Look, I cannot hazard a guess, Greg, because I just don't know. People don't talk to me. So perhaps it could be, but we just don't know. The silent majority, we will only know on the day, on October the 14th.
And have you declared publicly your own intention?
No, and I think still I will hold my stand, have that stance in terms of it's my private vote. As any vote, you keep it to yourself, and I will, I will go to the poll. It's my own personal vote.
It's a secret ballot. Yep. As you sit there on the crossbenches and you watch some of the debate, there's been plenty of it, not just this week, but for months now, really, today. What does it strike? How does it strike you about the robustness of that? On The Voice in particular, we're talking about here. Has it been overly divisive from a parliamentary point of view? And of course, that filters out into communities.
Yeah, look, I think that it certainly has been quite robust, and that's obviously the nature of politics. There's the for and there's against. That's what we call debate. You know, it's about. That certainly, from my perspective, I wondered whether or not what we're doing here would really relate to the people out there in the majority of the electorate. So I don't believe, because if I don't get that sense of what we're doing in here, when we go out there, people say, oh, you know, what you're saying is important. No one is approaching me and saying that to me. So from my perspective, we are quite disconnected with the majority of the Australian electorates, and in terms of what we are debating in the House. But certainly it has been very robust, you know, I think since I started Parliament.
Yeah, what about the R word, racism? You know, in a different context have been familiar with this throughout your life, I guess, or your life in Australia. There's no room for racism. It should not be used for political purposes, Linda Burney told the House today. Has that line been crossed or crossed unnecessarily, excessively in this Voice debate in the Parliament?
Look, I think people often, as for me, as somebody who is a migrant and refugee, I don't take things to heart. I don't take offence to any name callings or any kind of, you know, sometimes you kind of, you know, take a step back, but I don't take it a personal offence to that. So I think when we talk about racism, it has to be really, you know, offensive and really impacts you emotionally. But then that's my judgment. What is personal offensive to me might not. Might be for you, but not for me, right? So there's different interpretation of what is offensive and what is racism. I don't use the word racism lightly, and I think I will be very cautious when I call that out if I think that person deserves it. But yeah, I think that we need to really be mindful with our language and how we use that language to describe somebody who might have a different opinion to ours. Doesn't mean that they're racist.
Yeah, fair enough. Interested in your perspectives on that. Just finally, it comes to an associated point, I suppose, from the crossbench. Kylie Tink raised a very public complaint late last week about sensory assault, I think she described it, in the Parliament. In other words, really noisy and some questionable conduct.
Yeah.
Your own recent experience of that, is there any?
Look, being in politics long enough, I have experienced a lot of name callings, a lot of abuse, words that, you know, even actually being told to my face. I see that as politics. Sure, we need to actually improve how we respect one another in the House, but we do have the Speaker who does his job really well in managing the debate in the House. We have procedures and standing orders that we can stand up and say, call out the standing orders and procedures. So we have mechanism in place to ensure that we behave as best as we can. Of course, when it comes in an emotional argument, people can get quite emotional and can say things, but then they have to apologise and withdraw. So there are those mechanisms in place, I believe, and you just have to learn. I think you can, you know, you learn to operate in that environment. It is a bear pit after all.
It certainly is. Yeah.
You know, it sometimes reminds me of, like, it was like back in the olden days, the Gladiator, when you sent those people out there for the lions to eat and you fight, you're sitting up there, spectator. But I think it's human nature to have that. And I believe and I know that a lot of those members, while they argue and they throw things at one another, when they walk out of that room, they're friends.
Right.
They you know, so they are colleagues. So, yeah.
That is a bit of a feature of this place, and no matter where you sit, I guess you view and experience it differently. That's part of the point of having some diversity in the Parliament, Dai.
Absolutely, and I love that diversity of perspectives, and I think it's great that, you know, we can improve more in terms of the language use, certainly, but I believe we have mechanism in place there.
Plenty of guardrails. Dai, thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk again soon. All right, a parliamentary committee